She said yes to another man in front of the entire class, expecting me to fall apart. 3 years later, she was the maid of honor at my wedding, to her own best friend. She still doesn't know I planned it that way from the very first day. Alright, let's get into it because this one took 3 years to fully cook, and every single minute of it was worth it. I'm 26 now, but this whole thing started when I was 23, in my final year of university. Her name, I'll call her Meera. We'd known each other since freshman year. Not dating, just orbiting each other. Same friend group, same classes, same late-night study sessions in the library that somehow always turned into 3-hour conversations about nothing and everything. I liked her. Everyone knew I liked her. I wasn't subtle about it, not because I was confident, but because I genuinely didn't know how to hide it. I'd save her a seat in lectures. I'd bring her coffee exactly the way she liked it. Too much sugar, barely any milk. I helped her with 2 entire semesters of statistics, a subject I personally hated, just so I'd have an excuse to sit next to her twice a week. Her best friend was a girl I'll call Aisha. Aisha and I weren't close back then. Not enemies, not friends. Just 2 people who existed in the same circle because we both cared about Meera in different ways. She as a best friend, me as whatever I was trying to be. Here's the thing people don't understand about unrequited love when you're 22 or 23. You don't actually know it's unrequited. You just know it's complicated. You tell yourself she's just busy. She's just stressed about finals. She's just not ready. You invent 100 excuses because the alternative, that she simply doesn't feel the same, is too heavy to hold. I'd been building up to confessing to Meera for almost a year. I had a plan. A stupid, overly sentimental plan that I'm almost embarrassed to admit now. Our university had this tradition. During the last week of final year, seniors would write letters to people who mattered to them, and on the last day of classes, a designated letter day, people could stand up in front of the lecture hall and read them out loud if they wanted to. Public, dramatic, very on-brand for university culture. I'd been writing and rewriting that letter for months. I wasn't going to read it in front of everyone. That wasn't really my style. My plan was quieter. I was going to give it to her privately after the last exam, when the pressure was off and there was nothing left to be scared of. Except somebody else had the exact same idea. Except he wasn't quiet about it at all. His name was Farhan. A guy from the business faculty, decent-looking, loud, confident in the way that people mistake for charisma. He'd apparently been talking to Meera for a few weeks. Nothing I knew about, nothing anyone in our group really knew about because he wasn't part of our circle. On letter day, in front of nearly 150 people in that lecture hall, Farhan stood up before the professor even dismissed us for the final time. He walked to the front. He didn't have a letter. He had a bouquet, a small velvet box with a bracelet inside, and absolutely zero fear of humiliation. "Meera," he said, loud enough that the mics weren't even necessary. "I've liked you since second year. I know this is dramatic. I don't care. I wanted to ask you in front of everyone if you'd give me a chance." I was sitting 4 rows back with my letter folded in my jacket pocket. The room went quiet in that specific way rooms go quiet right before something humiliating happens to someone. Meera looked stunned. Genuinely stunned. I'll give her that much, it wasn't rehearsed. She glanced around the room, at her friends, at Aisha specifically, who was sitting beside her with wide eyes. Then she stood up. "Okay," she said, laughing a little, clearly overwhelmed. "Yeah, okay." The room erupted. Cheering, clapping, someone whistling. Farhan hugged her, slid the bracelet onto her wrist right there, and the whole lecture hall turned into some kind of spontaneous celebration. I sat there. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just sat there with a folded letter in my pocket that had taken me 4 months to write, watching the girl I'd built an entire imagined future around say yes to someone else in front of the whole graduating class. People who knew about my feelings for Meera, and there were plenty who did, kept glancing back at me throughout the whole thing. I could feel it. That specific kind of attention where people aren't looking at you. They're watching you, waiting to see how badly you're going to react. I didn't give them anything. I clapped. Not enthusiastically, but I clapped. I even managed something close to a smile when Meera caught my eye for half a second across the room. A flicker of something. Guilt, maybe, or just awkwardness before she looked away again. After class ended, people slowly filtered out. I stayed in my seat a little longer than I needed to, pretending to pack up slowly. That's when Aisha sat down next to me. She didn't say anything for a second. Then she just said, quietly, "You okay?" I looked at her, and for some reason, maybe because I was tired of performing composure for a whole room, or maybe because something about the way she asked felt genuinely different from everyone else's morbid curiosity, I actually told her the truth. "No," I said. "Not really." She didn't laugh. She didn't try to fix it with some empty reassurance. She just nodded like she understood exactly what it cost me to say that one word. "I figured," she said. "I saw your face." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Was it that obvious? To me?" "Yeah." She shrugged. "I've known for a while. I didn't know it yet, sitting in that half-empty lecture hall with a letter I'd never give anyone. But that conversation was the actual beginning of my story. Not the humiliation. We ended up leaving the lecture hall together, mostly because neither of us had anywhere else to be, and walking felt easier than sitting still. "You want to talk about it? Or you want to pretend nothing happened?" Aisha asked as we crossed the parking lot. "Pretend," I said immediately. "Cool. What do you want to talk about instead?" That made me actually laugh, the first real laugh I'd had in probably an hour. It was such a small thing, but it mattered. Someone not tiptoeing around me, not treating me like I was one wrong word away from shattering. We ended up at a small cafe near campus, the kind of place with mismatched chairs and a barista who knew half the regulars by name. We talked for 2 hours. Not about Meera, mostly. About her major, about my job offer that had just come through from a logistics company, about a trip she was planning with her family after graduation. Normal things. Things that had nothing to do with the fact that I just watched my future get handed to someone else in front of an audience. Somewhere in that conversation, I noticed something I hadn't really let myself notice before. Aisha was easy to talk to. Genuinely easy in a way Meera, for all the time I'd spent building her up in my head, actually never was. With Meera, I was always performing a little. Trying to say the right thing, trying to be interesting enough, trying to earn something. With Aisha, I didn't have to try. I just talked, and she listened, and she talked back, and it was the first conversation I'd had in months that didn't feel like an audition. I want to be honest about something here because I think it matters for the rest of this story. I did not fall for Aisha that afternoon out of spite or as some kind of rebound. That's not what this is. What happened was slower and more real than that, even if it started on the same day my heart got publicly stomped on. Over the next few weeks, we kept talking. At first, it was casual. She'd text me a meme, I'd send back something equally stupid. Then it became checking in on each other daily. Then it became her showing up at my apartment with food because I mentioned I'd been too busy job hunting to eat properly. Then it became something neither of us said out loud, but both of us clearly felt. Meanwhile, Meera and Farhan were the campus power couple. Everyone talked about them. Group chats were full of updates about their dates, their matching photos, the promise ring he gave her 2 months in, which felt fast even for university relationships, but nobody said anything because Meera looked happy, or at least she looked like someone performing happiness convincingly enough that people stopped questioning it. I saw them around campus sometimes. It stung less each time. Not because I stopped caring about what had happened, but because I had somewhere else to put my attention now. Aisha had this way of filling space that used to be reserved for thinking about Meera. About 6 weeks after letter day, Aisha and I were sitting on the roof of her apartment building. She had this habit of dragging a blanket up there whenever she wanted to think, and by then I'd become part of that habit too. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead. Are we a thing? Like an actual thing? Or am I just the rebound you haven't admitted to yourself yet?" I appreciated that she asked it that directly. It would have been easy for either of us to let it stay vague, comfortable, undefined. But Aisha wasn't really built for vague. "I've thought about that," I told her honestly. "A lot, actually. And I don't think you're a rebound. A rebound is when you're trying to replace someone. I'm not trying to replace anyone. I just actually want to be here, with you, not as a distraction from something else." She studied my face for a long moment, like she was checking whether I meant it or just knew the right words to say. "Okay," she said finally. "Then yeah, we're a thing. We didn't make some big announcement. We didn't want to. Partly because it still felt new and fragile, and partly, I'll admit this, because of Meera. Aisha was worried about how her best friend would react to her dating the guy Meera had just very publicly rejected, even though Meera was the one who'd done the rejecting. "She's going to make it weird," Aisha said. "Not because she still likes you. I don't think she ever really did, not the way you liked her. But because it'll feel strange to her. Her best friend and the guy she turned down. So what do? We wait a bit, not hide it forever. Just let it breathe before we make it public." I agreed. It made sense at the time. What I didn't fully understand yet, what I'd only pieced together much later, was that Aisha wasn't just protecting Meera's feelings. She was protecting something else too. Something about the dynamic between the three of us that went back further than I realized. Something Meera had done more than once. Something Aisha had quietly absorbed for years without ever making it anyone else's problem. I found out what that was almost a year later. And that's when this story stopped being about heartbreak and started being about something else entirely. The truth came out on a night I wasn't even supposed to be there for. It was about 10 months after Letter Day. Aisha and I had been together quietly for most of that time. Quietly meaning our close friends knew, but we still hadn't made it official in front of the wider group, mostly out of habit at that point rather than any real fear. Meera and Farhan, meanwhile, had started falling apart. Slowly at first, canceled dates, shorter replies, Meera showing up to group hangouts without him more and more often. Then all at once, the way these things usually do. He'd been messaging other girls behind her back for months. Not just talking, actual dates, while Meera thought they were exclusive. Aisha, being her best friend, spent a lot of those weeks being the person Meera cried to. I didn't mind. I understood loyalty, and Aisha had plenty of it, even for people who probably didn't deserve as much of it as they got. One night, Aisha came back from one of those long comfort sessions with Meera looking unusually quiet. Not sad exactly. Unsettled. "What happened?" I asked. She sat down across from me, turning her cup of tea in her hands without drinking it. "Meera told me something tonight," she said. "About Letter Day." I felt my stomach tighten slightly, the way it always did whenever that day came up, even now. "What about it?" Aisha hesitated for a long moment. "She knew before Farhan stood up. She knew you were planning something. Sana told her, remember Sana, from our stats class? Sana saw you rewriting a letter in the library like 3 separate times and put it together. She told Meera as like a heads up. A hey, I think he's going to confess to you soon kind of thing." I sat very still. When did she find out? 2 days before Letter Day. 2 days. I did the math immediately, the way you do when a piece of information rearranges everything you thought you understood about a moment in your life. Farhan hadn't spontaneously confessed in some wild moment of courage. Meera had known I was planning something. And somehow, within 48 hours, Farhan showed up with a bouquet and a bracelet and asked her in front of the entire lecture hall. "She told him," I said slowly. "Didn't she?" Aisha didn't answer right away, which was answer enough. "She panicked," Aisha finally said. "She liked you as a friend, I think genuinely, but she didn't want whatever it was you were going to say. She didn't know how to turn you down without it being this whole awkward thing between us, in the friend group, for the rest of the year. So when Farhan mentioned he was thinking about confessing to her too around the same time, she basically encouraged him to move first, publicly, big gesture, so there'd be no room for you to say anything at all. I sat with that for a long moment. It wasn't just that she'd said yes to someone else. It wasn't even really about the rejection itself. People get rejected, that's life, that's not what stayed with me all these months. What stayed with me was this. She'd known exactly what I was going to do, and instead of just telling me the truth quietly, gently, like a person who respected me even a little, she'd engineered a public spectacle specifically designed to make sure I never got the chance to say what I'd spent 4 months writing. She hadn't just turned me down. She'd made sure I never got a real shot at being turned down like a person. She'd erased my letter before I ever opened my mouth. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked Aisha. My voice wasn't angry, not really, just tired. "Because I didn't know until tonight," she said. "Meera's never told anyone this. She only told me because Farhan cheating on her cracked something open, I think. She's been carrying guilt about it for almost a year." I nodded slowly, processing it. Are you upset? Aisha asked carefully. At me, I mean, for not telling you sooner. Or for still being close to her, knowing what she did. I thought about that question honestly before I answered it because I owed her honesty always. No, I said. I'm not upset with you. You didn't know. And I'm not asking you to stop being her friend. That's not who you are, and it's not who I want you to be. I paused. I'm just done being someone Meera gets to script around. That's all. Aisha reached over and took my hand. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I think you deserve someone who'd never do that to you. Script around you like that. Make a decision about your feelings without ever actually including you in it. I looked at her. Really looked at her. The way you look at someone when a piece of your life suddenly clicks into a shape you didn't expect. I think I already found her, I said. She laughed, a little embarrassed, and shoved my shoulder lightly. But she didn't let go of my hand. That night didn't feel like the end of anything. It felt like the actual beginning. The moment I stopped being the guy quietly nursing an old humiliation and started being someone who understood, clearly and completely, exactly what had happened to him and exactly who had actually shown up for him when it mattered. Meera never found out that I knew the truth. Not then. She wouldn't find out for almost 2 more years. And when she finally did, it wouldn't be from Aisha, and it wouldn't be an accident. Life moved forward the way it does when you stop waiting for someone else to notice you. Aisha and I made things official about a year after that conversation on her roof. Not because we needed some big moment to validate it, but because by then it felt silly to keep calling it anything other than what it obviously was. We told the group together, over dinner, no big speech, just a simple hey, so, we're together that landed with far less drama than either of us expected. Most people already knew anyway. A few said they'd been waiting for us to admit it for months. Meera's reaction, when she found out, was polite. A little too polite if I'm being honest. The kind of politeness that has a thin layer of discomfort sitting just underneath it. She hugged Aisha, said something like, I'm happy for you guys, and never brought it up again. I don't think it was jealousy, not really. I think it was the quiet unease of watching 2 people build something solid out of a moment she'd once treated as disposable. I graduated, took the logistics job, worked my way up faster than I expected. Turned out the same stubbornness that had kept me writing and rewriting that letter for 4 months translated pretty well into staying late, learning every part of the operation, making myself useful enough that promotion started finding me instead of the other way around. Within 2 years, I was managing a regional distribution contract worth more than my starting salary times 10. Aisha finished her degree, started working in marketing for a mid-sized firm, and within a year was running her own small freelance branding business on the side. We moved in together about 18 months after we made things official. It wasn't dramatic. It was just obvious, the way the right decisions usually are once you're actually living them instead of overthinking them. Meera and Farhan never really recovered from the cheating. They broke up publicly, messily, about 4 months after Aisha told me the truth about Letter Day. Meera dated around for a while after that. Nothing serious, nothing that lasted. I heard about most of it secondhand, through Aisha, who never gossiped about her best friend but also never fully hid things from me either. There was an unspoken rule between us. Aisha could keep being Meera's friend, and I wouldn't ask her to choose sides, but she also wasn't going to pretend things around me that weren't true. About 2.5 years after Letter Day, I proposed to Aisha. I didn't do it in front of 150 people. I didn't need an audience to know it was real. We were on that same rooftop, the one with the blanket, the one where she'd asked me point blank if she was a rebound. I figured if that spot was where this whole thing had actually started. Not the lecture hall, not the humiliation, but that honest conversation on a roof. It deserved to be where the next chapter started too. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. When it came time to plan the wedding, there was really only one conversation that mattered, and it happened one evening in our kitchen. I want Meera to be my maid of honor, Aisha said. I didn't even blink. Okay. You're not going to say anything about it? Why would I? She's your best friend. Has been since you were 14. That's not something that's supposed to change because of what happened between me and her 3 years ago. I paused, then added, besides, I think I want her there, for a very specific reason. Aisha raised an eyebrow. What reason? I told her. I'd been sitting on this idea for a while, not a plan for revenge exactly, because by that point I genuinely didn't need revenge. What happened to me on letter day had, in a strange roundabout way, led me directly to the best thing in my life. I wasn't angry anymore, but I did want one thing. One quiet, closed-loop kind of thing. I wanted Meera to know that I knew. Not to humiliate her. Not to make a scene the way she'd made one for me. Just to close the circle honestly, on my own terms, in my own time, the way I should have been allowed to on letter day in the first place. Are you sure? Aisha asked once I explained it. It's going to be strange for her. Finding out like that at your wedding of all places. I know, I said. But I've thought about this a lot. I don't want to embarrass her. I don't want a scene. I just want her to understand, quietly, that I've known the truth for 2 years, and I chose grace over confrontation the entire time. That's it. That's the whole point. Aisha considered it for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, I trust you not to make it ugly. I won't, I said. I promise. The wedding was set for a Saturday in late October, at a small venue just outside the city. Nothing extravagant, nothing designed to prove a point to anyone watching. String lights, about 80 guests, most of them people who'd actually mattered to us over the years rather than people we felt obligated to invite. Meera, as maid of honor, was there from the morning of the wedding, helping Aisha get ready, fixing her veil, doing all the things a best friend does on a day like that. I watched them together sometimes, from a distance, and I could see it clearly, the real, unforced closeness between them, the kind of friendship that had actually survived everything, including a version of me that once felt entitled to resent it. I wasn't angry at Meera anymore. I want to be clear about that. What I felt, walking toward that altar, was something closer to gratitude. Strange as that sounds. If she'd never orchestrated that public confession, if she'd never made sure I never got to say what I came there to say, I might have spent years chasing a version of happiness that was never actually going to fit me. But gratitude and closure are two different things. And I still had one more thing to say to her, even if she didn't know it was coming. The ceremony itself went the way weddings usually do when nothing goes wrong. Quick, warm, a blur of vows and applause, and Aisha's hands steady in mine the entire time. I don't remember every detail. I remember her eyes. I remember thinking, somewhere in the middle of my vows, that the version of me sitting in that lecture hall 3 years earlier, holding a folded letter he'd never get to give, had no idea he was actually the lucky one. The reception was at the same venue. String lights strung between the trees. Tables scattered across a lawn that still held some of the afternoon's warmth. Toasts came and went. Aisha's father spoke, a little too long, the way fathers do. My best man told an embarrassing story from university that made half the room laugh, and Aisha turned faintly red. Then it was Meera's turn. She stood up, glass in hand, and gave the kind of maid of honor speech you'd expect from someone who'd genuinely known the bride since they were 14. Funny in the right places, sincere in the right places, a story about them sneaking out during a school trip that had the whole room laughing. She ended it looking at Aisha with real tears in her eyes. I've watched you fall in love exactly once in your life, Meera said, raising her glass toward us both. And I've never seen you happier than you are right now. To Aisha and to the best guy I know. Everyone raised their glasses. I raised mine too. Later that night, after most of the toasts were done and the dance floor had filled up, I found a quiet moment to walk over to where Meera was standing near the edge of the lawn, taking a break from the noise with a drink in her hand. Hey, she said, smiling. Great wedding. Really. I'm so happy for you both. Thanks, I said, for everything today. She really wanted you up there. Of course, I wouldn't have missed it. I hesitated for a second, then decided this was the moment. Not dramatic, not public, just the two of us, at the edge of a party neither of us needed to perform for anymore. Can I tell you something? I asked. It's not going to change anything. I just think you should hear it from me, not secondhand. Something in her face shifted slightly, a small flicker of caution. Okay. I know what happened before letter day, I said quietly. I know Sana told you I was planning to confess. I know you told Farhan, and I know that's why he moved when he did, so there wouldn't be room for me to say anything at all. The color drained slightly from her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I'm not upset about it anymore, I continued, before she could spiral into an apology I didn't need. I want to be really clear about that. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad on my wedding day, of all days. I'm telling you because I spent almost a year thinking you just didn't feel the same way about me, and that was a story I could live with. Took me a long time to find out it wasn't actually the full story. And I think, after 3 years, after everything, I finally just wanted you to know that I know. That's it. Nothing else has to happen because of it. Meera stood there for a long moment, glass still in her hand, eyes glistening. I've regretted that for 3 years, she finally said, her voice unsteady. I was 22 and terrified of hurting you, and I handled it in probably the most cowardly way a person could handle something like that. I told myself it was easier for everyone if there was no room for an awkward conversation. I didn't think about what it actually did to you. I'm so sorry. I know, I said. And for a long time, I thought that day was the worst thing that happened to me in university. And now, I looked past her, toward the dance floor, toward Aisha laughing with her father under the string lights, spinning slowly in a dress she'd picked because it made her feel like herself rather than like a bride in a magazine. Now I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me, I said, because if you hadn't done what you did, I never would have stayed behind in that lecture hall long enough for your best friend to ask if I was okay. Meera followed my gaze toward Aisha, and something in her expression softened into something that looked almost like relief. She really is the best person I know, Meera said quietly. Yeah, I said. She is. For what it's worth, Meera added, wiping quickly at her eyes before it could turn into a real cry at someone else's wedding. I don't think I could have picked anyone better for her either, even if it took me embarrassing myself completely to accidentally make it happen. I laughed, and for the first time in 3 years, the laugh didn't have anything complicated tangled up inside it. Go dance with your best friend, I told her. It's her wedding. Let's not make it about letter day. She smiled, set her drink down, and walked toward the dance floor, and a few seconds later I watched Aisha pull her into a hug that had nothing performative in it at all. Just two people who'd actually stayed real friends through every complicated turn the last 3 years had thrown at them. I stood at the edge of that lawn for a moment longer, watching the two of them laugh under the lights, and I thought about the version of myself sitting in that lecture hall 3 years earlier, convinced his whole future had just collapsed in front of 150 people. He didn't know yet that the girl sitting beside the one who broke his heart would be the one who'd actually catch him. He didn't know that the humiliation wasn't the ending. It was just the worst possible way of getting redirected toward the right one. I finished my drink, walked back onto the dance floor, and found my wife exactly where I always find the best parts of my life now. Right in the middle of everything, laughing like nothing had ever gone wrong at all. Because in the end, it hadn't. Story END, if you're new here, this one took 3 years to actually pay off, and honestly, it's one of my favorites, because for once, nobody had to lose for someone else to win. If you're hooked on stories like this, don't forget to hit that hype button. It tells YouTube this one deserves to blow up, and it keeps these stories coming your way, one new one every single day.